For years, the truth stayed hidden, the victims forgotten, the cases left cold, until science revealed what time could not. This is decades in the dark where cold cases are brought back to light. At first, nothing about this case made sense. 2 children were missing, but their mother wasn't searching for them. She wasn't pleading for help. She wasn't cooperating with police. Instead, she was smiling, laughing, on a beach in Hawaii. While her children were still missing, she was getting married. This is the case of lorivallow Daybell, where belief, control, and delusion collided, with devastating consequences. On the surface, lorivallow appeared to be a devoted mother. She had 2 children living with her, Tylee Ryan, her biological daughter from a previous marriage, and Joshua J.J. Vallow, a young boy with autism who had been adopted by Lori and her husband, Charles Vallow. Tylee had grown up around instability and conflict, but was known to be protective, especially of J.J. J.J. depended heavily on routine, structure, and the people around him. For a time, Lori played the role expected of her, but that version of her wouldn't last. In 2018, Lori met Chad Daybell. Chad didn't just have religious beliefs. He believed he had authority. He claimed he could see beyond this life, that he could access past lives, and that he could measure a person's spiritual state. He created a system he called vibrations. According to Chad, every person could be assigned a numerical value that reflected their spiritual condition. Higher numbers meant someone was light, aligned with God, and part of a chosen group that would survive the end times. Lower numbers meant someone was dark. But dark didn't just mean immoral or flawed. To Chad, it meant something far more extreme. He claimed that when a person's vibration dropped low enough, their original soul had already left their body. What remained was not empty, it was replaced. He believed the person's true identity was gone, and that their body was now being inhabited or controlled by a different entity. Not something vague or symbolic, but something he described as a dark spirit. In some cases, something closer to a demonic presence. In his teachings, these entities were part of a larger spiritual battle, forces working against God and against those he believed were chosen. So when he labeled someone as dark, he wasn't just saying they were bad. He was saying they were no longer human in the way that mattered, that their body had been overtaken, that the person inside was already gone. He called these people zombies, not fictional, not exaggerated. To him, and eventually to Lori, this was real. And in his system, if the real person was already gone, then what remained was no longer a life to protect. It was something to remove. Chad didn't keep these ideas abstract. He applied them directly to people in Lori's life. Lori's husband, Charles Vallow, was labeled dark before his death. Around that time, Charles had begun pushing back against Lori's beliefs, expressing concern for JJ, and threatening to expose what was happening. In Chad's framework, that resistance may have been seen as proof that he had been overtaken. Tylee Ryan was also labeled dark and given a low vibration score. Tylee had become more independent, more skeptical, and more vocal. She questioned Lori. She pushed back, and that may have put her at odds with the belief system Lori had begun to accept. JJ was labeled dark as well. Lori told people he had changed, that he was difficult, that something was wrong. In reality, JJ had autism and behavioral needs. But within Chad's belief system, those behaviors may have been interpreted as evidence that he was no longer himself. And once those labels were applied, everything changed. What made this system so dangerous was how completely it rewrote reality. It removed empathy. It replaced relationships with categories. And once someone was labeled dark, harming them no longer felt like harm. It felt justified, necessary, even righteous. Charles Vallow knew something was wrong. He told police Lori believed she was a god and that she was on a mission. He said she no longer saw him as her husband. At one point, she told him directly that he had been replaced, that he wasn't Charles anymore. On July 11, 2019, Charles went to Lori's home in Arizona to pick up JJ. Inside the house were Lori, Tylee, and Lori's brother, Alex Cox. According to Alex, a confrontation took place. He claimed Charles became aggressive and came at him with a bat, and that he shot him in self-defense. Tylee later told police that there had been an argument, and that she had been present when Charles was shot, though her statements did not fully explain what led to the violence. After the shooting, there was a delay before 911 was called. During that time, Lori left the home with JJ and went to get food. When police later interacted with her, she appeared calm and composed, not showing the level of distress that might be expected after witnessing a fatal shooting. At the time, the death was ruled self-defense and no charges were filed. But looking back, Charles had already been labeled dark. In September 2019, Tylee was last seen during a trip to Yellowstone National Park. Photos from that day show her with her family, but those close to her later said she seemed withdrawn. That was the last confirmed sighting of her. Shortly after, JJ disappeared. He was last seen at home in Rexburg, Idaho. Then, nothing. Lori told JJ's school he was being homeschooled, but that wasn't true. She told people he was staying with relatives, but that wasn't true either. At one point, she told someone JJ had become a zombie, that he was no longer himself. No missing persons report was filed. No search was initiated. Instead, Lori moved forward with her life. In October 2019, Chad's wife, Tammy Daybell, died suddenly. Her death was initially ruled natural causes, but the timing raised questions. Just weeks later, Chad married Lori. Tammy's body was later exhumed, and her death was ruled a homicide. Prosecutors argued that Chad was responsible, suggesting she had been killed so he and Lori could be together. In December 2019, Alex Cox died suddenly from a pulmonary embolism. He had been deeply involved in the events leading up to these deaths. He had carried out the shooting of Charles, and cell phone data would later place him at key locations tied to the children. While there is no clear evidence that Alex fully believed Chad's teachings, his actions suggest he was willing to carry out what was asked of him. In June 2020, investigators searched Chad Daybell's property in Idaho with a warrant. Cell phone data showed that Alex Cox had been on the property on the exact days the children disappeared, spending time in specific areas of the yard. Investigators began digging in those locations. They found JJ first, buried in a shallow grave. His body was wrapped in plastic and bound with duct tape. Then they found Tylee. Her remains were in a separate area. They had been burned, dismembered, and partially buried. The condition of her remains suggested an attempt to destroy evidence. Evidence strongly suggested that Alex Cox had been the one to transport and bury the bodies. Investigators believe Tylee was killed first. The exact cause of her death could not be determined due to the condition of her remains, but the evidence suggests her body was dismembered and burned shortly after her death. JJ's death was different. He was found with duct tape over his mouth and wrapped in plastic. Evidence indicated that he likely died from asphyxiation. 2 children, killed in different ways, both buried on the same property. Investigators built the case step by step. Cell phone data placed Alex at the burial sites. Financial records revealed changes following the deaths. Witnesses described Lori's statements about people being dark, and Lori repeatedly refused to produce the children. But one of the most powerful pieces of evidence was her behavior. While her children were missing, Lori traveled to Hawaii and married Chad Daybell on a beach. She smiled in photos. She appeared relaxed, while her children had already been buried. Lorivallow Daybell was found guilty of multiple counts of murder and conspiracy. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Chad Daybell was also convicted and sentenced to death. Tylee and JJ were buried on Chad Daybell's property in Idaho, hidden, as if they could be erased. But they weren't. What makes this case so unsettling isn't just what happened. It's how belief replaced reality. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing is certainty. This is Decades in the Dark, where science brings the past to light. Subscribe for more stories where justice never expires.